Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Et je me présente déjà puisque vous venez sans doute d'assez proche ou d'assez loin, peu importe. Je suis Patrick Thiel, je suis l'adjoint à la culture de la ville de Metz, en charge d'ailleurs de la culture et des établissements culturels à l'Eurométropole aussi. Et puis par ailleurs président de cette Cité musicale qui est partenaire et qui vous accueille aujourd'hui avec grand plaisir. D'abord, merci à ces concepteurs. Je veux parler de nos écoles d'architecture du Grand Est, à savoir celle de Nancy, celle de Reims et celle de Strasbourg, qui sont, je dirais, à la fois les organisateurs de ces rencontres, et puis le plaisir d'avoir comme titre « Rencontres européennes de l'architecture », parce que Metz se veut toujours une ville européenne. Et je pense que si Monsieur le maire avait pu être là, président de l'Eurométropole aussi, Monsieur le maire vous aurait dit combien il était européen et que cette ville portait l'Europe, d'abord parce qu'elle est transfrontalière à la fois avec le Luxembourg, l'Allemagne, pas tout à fait, mais presque avec la Belgique, mais aussi parce que Robert Schuman, qui est l'un de ses pères fondateurs, était messin et qu'il a été député de Metz notamment. Donc, merci pour ce titre et cette réalité européenne, et je crois qu'elle est nécessaire plus que jamais aujourd'hui. Alors, c'est un plaisir pour moi aussi, en tant que président de la Cité musicale, puisque nos relations avec les écoles d'architecture sont déjà longues et anciennes, et de pouvoir donc vous accueillir au nom de François Grosdidier, notre maire et président, et de vous souhaiter le plus beau soleil qui soit pour ces 2 jours, en harmonie avec notre Pierre de Jaumont. Mais c'est en effet très fier de pouvoir être le centre aujourd'hui de ces rencontres européennes, tant l'architecture compte pour nous, d'abord dans notre histoire, puisque vous le constaterez sans doute vous-même en vous y promenant, elle est dans l'ordre chronologique italo-franco-allemande, italienne pour toute la période du Moyen-Âge et de la Renaissance. Je en veux pour preuve un des bâtiments les plus emblématiques de la ville, qui est l'hôtel Saint-Livier du XIe, XIIe siècle et qui abrite aujourd'hui la modernité, puisque c'est le siège du Fonds régional d'art contemporain, ceci sur la colline Sainte-Croix, qui est l'hippodrome messin qui existe depuis 3000 ans. Et cette ville a été fondée à peu près il y a 3000 ans et a connu toute la période gallo-romaine. Ensuite, une architecture française, donc classique et non baroque, et qui est, je dirais, d'autant plus classique qu'elle a une certaine rigidité, certains diraient toute militaire, puisqu'à partir du XVIe et du XVIIe siècle, cette ville est passée d'une tradition plutôt commerçante et artistique à la fonction militaire, Vauban disant lui-même « Chaque place défend son duché, seule Metz défend l'État ». Ça vous donnait l'importance, je dirais, de ce virage militaire qui a encore un peu plus rigidifié le classicisme dont les principaux monuments de la ville française et non plus italienne, comme je l'ai suggéré tout à l'heure, à la place Saint-Louis, c'est tout à fait italien. Et puis enfin, une architecture non choisie à l'époque, qui est l'architecture que nous a laissée notamment Guillaume II, Guillaume Ier, qui a fait rattacher sous l'influence de Bismarck, vous le savez, ces 2 provinces qui étaient l'Alsace et une partie de la Lorraine seulement, mais une partie que l'on croyait germanophone, ce qui n'a jamais été le cas de Metz, et même Bismarck a reconnu que c'était une erreur d'avoir annexé la ville de Metz, qu'on aurait dû se contenter de la Moselle germanophone et non pas cette ville. En tous les cas, elle a servi de vitrine à l'empereur Guillaume II pour bâtir ici de beaux monuments, comme celui de la gare par laquelle vous êtes arrivé, la poste, le temple, à proximité d'ici, le palais du gouverneur. Tout ça évoque cette Allemagne de rêve presque européen, puisqu'on lui doit aussi l'avenue Foch, où vous avez de splendides hôtels particuliers et de très belles maisons architecturellement très intéressantes, et qui avait la volonté d'englober toute l'Europe, c'est-à-dire que nous avons là une copie des architectures à la fois hollandaises, allemandes, alsaciennes et même françaises, puisque la Chambre de commerce et d'industrie, par exemple, est dans un style qui irait parfaitement à Versailles, ou en tous les cas qui peut évoquer le Grand Trianon. C'est cette ville, donc férue d'architecture, qui vous reçoit, et j'espère que vous la découvrirez avec plaisir, en vous disant que c'est une ville bâtie sur des îles, et elles sont nombreuses. Et par exemple, notre opéra, qui est du XVIIIe siècle, je rappelle qu'il n'y en a que 3 en France, Metz en premier, le plus ancien, 1752, Bordeaux, évidemment dans une plus grande magnificence, et enfin Versailles. Tous les autres opéras sont du 19e ou du 20e siècle. Et cet opéra est sur une île. Allez-y, parce que juste à côté, il y a une construction allemande, un temple, sur cette île-là. Et donc, vous voyez bien la rupture, puisque, en plus, on le voit très facilement, puisque les Allemands ont construit dans une pierre qui n'était pas la pierre de Jaumont, pour la plupart, de façon à marquer une rupture, non seulement dans l'architecture, mais même dans la couleur, et en ayant choisi soit le grès gris, comme la gare, ou le grès rose. Mais c'est aussi une ville qui a tenu à s'ouvrir aux architectes. La preuve en est, d'une part, le centre Pompidou-Metz du Hatshepsut, mais aussi notre temple du sport, le grand palais des sports du Hachémétov. Et donc, on a comme cela un certain nombre de signatures et de grands architectes en tous les cas. Je vous invite d'ailleurs à regarder une vue globale que l'on a par la maquette de l'Arsenal, qui est située juste en face, pour ceux qui ont laissé leurs vêtements, du vestiaire. Voilà, je suis très heureux de vous accueillir, de vous souhaiter un très bon congrès. Et en tant que président de la Cité musicale, je vous dirais que pour une fois, la musique, 4e art chez les Grecs, est très heureux de recevoir le premier de tous les arts. Merci beaucoup et bon congrès.
Merci pour ce passage de témoin. Bonjour à toutes, bonjour à tous. Alors, ils ne sont pas encore tous arrivés, mais Madame Shelley McNamara, Monsieur Chen de Blacam, Madame Alice Cazet et Monsieur Kian Digan, c'est un vrai honneur de vous recevoir à Metz. Au nom des 3 maisons de l'architecture du Grand Est, représentées ici par leurs présidents, qui vont me rejoindre, Giovanni Pace et Claude Denu, et donc moi-même, nous vous remercions infiniment d'avoir accepté notre invitation pour les 7e rencontres européennes de l'architecture.
Oui, bien, merci. Merci d'avoir fait le déplacement et de venir à cet événement qui se veut un événement qui réunit une action des 3 maisons de l'architecture du Grand Est. Et cette année, l'événement, c'est l'Irlande du Nord. Pardon, l'Irlande. Excusez-moi. Et donc chaque année, c'est un pays qui est mis en avant. Voilà. Et cette année, la charge incombait à Caroline de préparer le discours et aussi cette arrivée.
Un petit mot, Claude ?
Oui, comme vous voyez, on est les 3 maisons. C'est que quand cette région Grand Est s'est mise en place, quand même c'était bizarre quand on a su que le sud de l'Allemagne et Charleville-Mézières allaient être dans la même région. Voilà, on a décidé de faire une action commune. Et l'action commune, on s'est dit que ce serait bien chaque année de mettre un coup de projecteur sur un pays européen, d'où le titre « Les rencontres européennes de l'architecture ». Cette année, donc, le coup de projecteur, c'est sur l'Irlande. L'an passé, c'était la Pologne. Avant, c'était l'Italie, l'Espagne, enfin voilà. Je vous rappelle qu'on est une association de bénévoles et que pour ces rencontres européennes, si vous avez des idées, venez nous voir. On a besoin de bénévoles puisque c'est des actions qui sont tournées vers à la fois un public spécialisé, d'architectes, de gens du bâtiment, mais aussi vers le grand public. Et donc, à chaque fois, je le répète, on a besoin que vous veniez nous donner un coup de main. On n'est pas des institutions, on ne dépend pas d'une collectivité locale ou machin, c'est vraiment un ensemble de bénévoles, principalement des architectes qui s'adressent à vous. Et cette année, Caroline, on te remercie de cette belle organisation, d'avoir réussi à faire venir des gens de talent. Voilà.
Nous tenons à remercier évidemment la ville de Metz et particulièrement l'Arsenal pour ce partenariat qui nous permet de vous accueillir dans ce magnifique bâtiment, ancien site militaire réhabilité en salle de spectacle par Ricardo Bofill. Nous remercions bien sûr nos partenaires, la Direction régionale des affaires culturelles, l'Ordre des architectes du Grand Est, ainsi que la Région Grand Est et le département de la Moselle, sans qui nous n'aurions pu organiser ces rencontres. Les maisons de l'architecture ont pour mission de sensibiliser le grand public à l'architecture et à son environnement bâti et paysager. Partager l'architecture, c'est donner l'opportunité à chacun d'avoir accès à une base commune de savoir qui fait que chaque habitant, chaque usager, soit un citoyen concerné et engagé par un cadre de vie respectueux de tous, pour qu'il y ait du lien entre les lieux et ceux qui les habitent. Par cet événement, co-organisé par la Maison de l'architecture de Champagne-Ardenne, à ma droite, la Maison européenne de l'architecture à ma gauche et la Maison de l'architecture de Lorraine que je représente, nous mettons en lumière les pratiques architecturales de nos pays voisins européens. Après le Portugal en 2017, l'Allemagne, la Belgique, l'Espagne, l'Italie et la Pologne, cette année, nous avons choisi de mettre à l'honneur l'Irlande. Et je vais laisser la parole à Emmanuel Caille, rédacteur en chef de la revue Da. Je vais lui laisser la parole pour qu'il nous présente nos invités. Merci et à plus tard.
Bonsoir. Je vous remercie moi aussi de m'avoir invité ce soir pour cette soirée. J'étais un peu intrigué au début, que personnellement je ne connais pas très bien l'Irlande et l'architecture irlandaise. Bien sûr, je connaissais un petit peu ces architectes et notamment l'agence Grafton qui a eu le Pritzker Prize il y a quelques années. Et je trouve que l'excellente idée que vous avez eue d'inviter ces trois architectes, c'est d'arriver à mettre en commun, en tout cas de rassembler dans une même soirée plusieurs générations d'architectes. Alors il y a Shelley de Blacam qui va commencer, qui est une figure pas très connue en dehors de l'Irlande, en tout cas en France, on va dire, voilà, mais qui est vraiment une figure très importante de l'architecture irlandaise. C'est quelqu'un qui a étudié avec Louis Kahn et dont je pense toute l'œuvre s'en ressent. Et il a été associé pendant des années avec John Mayer, qui est décédé il y a quelques années, qui lui avait travaillé un peu chez Robert Venturi. Donc ça, c'est vraiment une formation anglo-saxonne assez forte. Ils ont créé une agence en 1976, donc c'est bientôt 50 ans. Voilà, et c'est assez étonnant, vous verrez ce qu'il a fait, les choses n'ont vraiment pas vieilli. Et alors ce qui est intéressant, c'est en 2000, j'ai noté ça quelque part, en 2010, le pavillon de la Biennale d'architecture de Venise a présenté son travail. Et les commissaires d'exposition, c'était justement les deux jeunes architectes qui vont intervenir en troisième partie de l'agence Taka, que je vais vous présenter après. Alors, l'agence Grafton, c'est le long de la rue où se sont installés en 1978 Yvonne Farrell et Shelley McNamara, qui sont, je dirais, un tout petit peu une génération à peine plus jeune que Sean Blacam. Comme les autres, ce soir, ils ont tous étudié à l'University College of Dublin et ils ont tous enseigné. Donc, c'est vraiment un point commun qui est aussi intéressant. Ils se sont fait connaître en 2008 avec un bâtiment qu'ils ont construit à Milan, qui a tout d'un coup a soulevé l'intérêt au niveau international, jusqu'à ce qu'il soit invité à la Biennale de Venise en 2018, ce qui n'est pas rien. Je crois que c'était pas les premières femmes invitées, mais presque, puisqu'il y avait eu Sana après, mais c'est la première fois qu'il n'y avait qu'une seule, en tout cas que des femmes invitées. Et puis 2 ans après, ils ont eu le Pritzker Prize. Alors comme je sais qu'il y a des personnes dans l'assistance qui ne sont pas forcément familiers du monde de l'architecture, le Pritzker Prize, c'est l'équivalent du prix Nobel. Voilà, donc ça c'est vraiment très important. Et aussi, l'agence Grafton a construit 2 magnifiques bâtiments en France. La Toulouse School of Economics, un bâtiment en briques à Toulouse qui est absolument magnifique, que j'ai eu le plaisir de visiter et de publier dans la revue, ainsi que sur le plateau de Saclay, l'Institut Mines Télécom, qui a ouvert il n'y a pas très longtemps, un très beau bâtiment. Ensuite, eh bien, c'est l'agence Taka, alors une agence beaucoup plus jeune. Là, je ne dirais pas que c'est la génération d'après, c'est plusieurs générations après, puisqu'ils ont formé, eux, leur agence en 2007. Pardon. Et c'est une agence qui est formée de Alice Casey et de Kian Deegan, voilà, un nom bien irlandais, donc, qui ont fait le pavillon de la Biennale de Venise consacré à Shelley de Blacam. Voilà, et qui enseigne donc à l'université de Dublin. Je ne vais pas m'étendre parce que c'est eux qui vont mieux se présenter que je ne le ferai. Donc j'invite, je crois que, oui, voilà, Shelley de Blacam est là, donc je l'invite à venir et je vous demande de l'accueillir très chaleureusement, voilà, parce que c'est une grande figure de l'architecture en Irlande.
Thank you very much.
I am unsure why it should be assumed that it's okay to come to France and deliver a presentation in English. When I was a schoolboy, my father impressed on us, my brothers and sisters, the importance of speaking French, to read French literature and love French history and French culture. He sent each of us in turn on exchange on successive summers to French families around the Rhone Valley. I spent wonderful holidays in a village called Saint-Laurent-du-Pont, not far from Lyon, on the foothills of the Alps, and I learned to speak French. Now, all these years later, I have forgotten the ability to deliver this presentation in French. This is a lecture that I wrote last autumn to deliver to the Royal Academy in London on the occasion of the presentation of their Architecture Prize. In the beginning of my talk, I was trying to make connections between architectural practice and architectural education in England and in Ireland when I was a young architect. After delivering the written text, I will explain some projects from the office in Dublin, culminating in the brick buildings completed over 14 years in the Munster Technological University in Cork. There is one person, if I could have the next slide, please. There is one person who might have been here and is not. For 40 years, I worked alongside John Marr in architectural practice. He died 3 years ago. He was my best friend and a good friend to my family. John was brilliant and possessed in abundance, including some to excess, the talents we value most: creativity, kindness, love of painting, loyalty, and fun. I could go on. I worked with him. I relied on him because he understood instantly what was at issue on the desk. Here is a photograph of John on a Saturday or a Sunday morning and a second photograph of Rachel Chidlow, an English architect who worked with John and me in Trinity College. Rachel is a fine art graduate of the Manchester School of Art and Architecture, graduate of the Royal College of Art in Kensington, at work in Dawson Street with John. I will come back to this in a short while. A poet said about writing a line of poetry, "A line will take us hours, maybe, yet if it does not seem a moment's thought, our stitching and unstitching has been naught." We could say the same about drawing. If it does not seem a moment's thought, our stitching and unstitching has been naught. I will come back to this at the conclusion of my written narrative. William Chambers was the first architect of the Royal Academy. He was responsible for their original galleries at the Courtauld and built his masterpiece more than 250 years ago in Dublin, a classical building that they say is among the most important buildings in Europe. Chambers' drawing is on the right. It has one room and stands north of Dublin City on higher ground, looking south across the bay to the city and the Wicklow Mountains. It's called the Casino. Chambers never went to Dublin. He never saw his building. I have learned almost all that I know and love about this period of European architecture from his building and its legacy in Ireland. One room with an oak door never touched in 300 years with paint or coating, weathered for all those years under a Portland stone and granite portico. The door is framed and paneled, the frame and then the door in 75mm oak and joined with tongue and groove and dowel to make the opening. Thank you for coming to listen to this talk this evening. I have a script that will take 10 or 15 minutes and will follow with my presentation of some projects for the office. My written text will talk about recent Irish architecture, my own biography, study, and work in America, followed by a conclusion and something about visual understanding, the moment's thought in architecture, the establishment of the office with John Marr. The majority of the talk will be presentation and description through photographs and drawings of the projects. This is a map of Dublin. The sea is to the east. The river is the white line running through the middle, and on the right is Trinity College, the plan in black, and the dining hall, which I will talk about. Below that, on St. Stephen's Green, in the red corner, with the red square, is an office building. To the west of Trinity College, in the medieval city, is the apartment building that I will talk about. And to the extreme northwest, in that huge park, which is the west of Dublin City, there are 3 houses, and there was a famous competition for a house for the Prime Minister. I just want to go back quickly. Now, my control doesn't allow me to do that. I don't know if I should. The 8 buildings that I will show are a parish church, which is a competition, the Taoiseach's house, the dining hall in Trinity College, the apartment building in Temple Bar, the office building on St. Stephen's Green, a public library in a country town in the middle of Ireland, and a small hotel in the Aran Islands on the extreme west coast of Ireland, and then some buildings at the Munster. 14 years of work on buildings for the new university, the Munster Technological University. I want to make a second connection between London and Dublin in architecture over the past 40 years, and to say what was going on in education of architects in Ireland during that time that laid the foundations for a new school of modern Irish architecture. An extraordinary thing happened when I was a student. The professional institutes, the RIBA and the RIAI, were unhappy. The university appointed a director from Oxford to transform the School of Architecture in Dublin. His plan was to engage professional practitioners, visiting staff, young architects, and big beasts from practice in Glasgow, London, York, Cambridge, Dublin, and America. In London at that time, in the Royal College of Art, there was a graduate course in architecture with entry for architects who had completed part 2 of their studies, and most important, there was a special entry for painting and sculpture graduates into the 2 postgraduate course, leading to an exemption from part 2 of the professional qualification. The combination of teaching by architects from practice with graduates from schools of architecture and schools of fine art was potent. The point is that institutions under the guidance of serious architects and leaders of the institutions that supported them made a transformative difference. They changed the direction of architecture in Dublin. I am delighted to record these events in this place and add that no small part of all of that was friendships made by students and their teachers. That laid the foundations of the present generation of Irish architects, many of whom now build very important buildings throughout the world. I studied at University College Dublin from 1963-1968. I traveled in Holland, Italy, Spain, and France. At the end of my second year of University College Dublin, my father arranged a summer job for me in Lansing in Michigan through his brother, who was an engineer in the State Highway Commission. Shortly after I landed in the Midwest, my uncle said, "You're in America now, you'll need a car." From the car sales list of a local newspaper, he bought a 1947 Buick Saloon of enormous proportions for a modest sum. I remember the upholstery was untouched since new because it was protected with clear plastic covers. At the library in Michigan State University, I found wonderful books on architecture and planned weekend excursions to Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, Western Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, and Chicago. I saw Frank Lloyd Wright's buildings, many of them, as well as Mies van der Rohe and H.H. Richardson. As part of training in UCD, attendance at summer meetings in Europe, students of architecture, directed by Jacob Blacam and Aldo van Eyck in Delft and Aachen. We visited white houses of the Wiesenhof and brick-built public housing. I was enthralled by Johannes Dijker, his school and sanatorium, white plaster steel windows. These summer schools were the latter end of Team 10 meetings that included Le Corbusier and Louis Kahn and the Smithsons. After graduation, during a short sojourn in London in the King's Road office of Chamberlain, Powell and Bon, I saw the fruits of the Golden Lane competition and public housing projects for the GLC. I set about finding a place in the Graduate School of in America and landed in Philadelphia in a studio course taught by Louis Kahn, the French engineer Robert Luricale, and took courses in city planning and landscape architecture in the University of Pennsylvania. I became a friend with Lou and his family. I moonlighted in his office at night while attending at the university by day. Under his direction, I did drawings for bits of the lecture theatre at the Kimball Museum in Fort Worth. On graduation, I joined the office full-time and spent the next 2 years as assistant to the project architect working under Lou for the Paul Mellon Centre of British Art and British Studies at Yale in New Haven. About 6 months into the job, there was a crisis over the budget. The site on Chapel Street across the road from Cahn's 1950s building, not far from the School of Architecture. Apart from the most important private collection of 17th and 18th century paintings and books outside the United Kingdom, Paul Mellon donated the cost of building a museum to house his collection, a sum of $14 million. Mellon became unhappy with the City of New Haven planning regulation that required commercial shops, revenue to the city, on the streets fronts of the museum. He took a dim view of the position of students on campus on the war and refused to budge on the budget. The project architect, who had done much of the heavy lifting in the design of a project for the great conference building in the city of Venice in the Giardini next to the Biennale, for which very little fees were paid by the city of Venice, the senior lieutenant departed the office, and it fell to a group of citizens to turn the design from $19 million back to $14 million. In jest, Lou wrote Palazzo Miloni on one of my drawings. Gone went the stainless steel corner towers of the museum air handling, banished to the basement. Also the top floor vaulted gallery, reminiscent of Kimball, was eliminated. It became a simpler square plan in 2 halves with galleries, conservation department, a library of books, and paper conservation. The museum had a figure of 8 visitor circulation around a pair of top-lit courtyards, one the stair and lift entrance, and the other a lecture theatre. I went to meetings with Lou and the director, Jules Prown, and the university president, Kingman Brewster, in New Haven. I recall a meeting in New York at the Yale Club after our presentation of the revised design, having passed out on a bench following 48-hour charrette, being collected from the bench in the Metropolitan Museum by my wife, Una. An interesting point about the Mellon building is a few years ago, the university, inspired by new concerns driven by the American imperative to retain daylight in the galleries, in contrast to the European rush to darkness, and anxious to lead in every aspect of the building's design and the museum's work towards zero carbon. Yale commissioned its own conservation architects to deconstruct much of the interior of the building except the concrete frame and the stainless steel facade. They put back the interior exactly as designed to meet the new thinking. They were very serious about their purpose. In 1972, I returned to Dublin with an appointment as first-year studio master at University College. I enjoyed a number of years teaching and made friends with John Marr through teaching. We set about starting our own office through competitions. During my time as first-year master, I took students on buses all over the country, traveled abroad to Cambridge and London, and by air throughout Europe. I set simple design tasks and taught materials of construction design and coordinated reviews with distinguished visitors. We rarely failed a studio in studio work. The only sanction for a student in jeopardy was a choice between 6 months or a whole year in Italy or France. Architects will tell you that Shane's approach to criticism was silence. On a jury, he never said much. He just invited examination of the drawings on the wall. That's all. Students said they were terrified. I loved every moment of teaching in the university, and as time passed, I became increasingly conflicted. I knew that every moment out of the office was less attention to what I felt was most important. I jumped. It is my conviction that architecture speaks for itself. Ours is a visual expression. Words and what architects say about their own work are secondary. Study and experience of the buildings explains everything. The building speaks for itself. I recall that Louis Kahn was excruciatingly difficult to listen to or understand in a formal setting. He was always repeating himself. He kept saying the same thing over and over again. I admired from a distance his extraordinary search for the words to express the meaning and origins of the form of his buildings, his search for the spirit of a place and the institution at hand. I wish I had words that could say what a poet said about poems and parables crossing from the domain of the matter of fact into the domain of the imagined. I recall the words of another writer in large letters recently seen on a hoarding during the refurbishment of 85 and 86 of St. Stephen's Green in Dublin to a museum of literature in response to a question posed about a work of art. The hoarding proclaimed a question: how deep the well from whence it sprang. If a building does not seem a moment's thought, our stitching and unstitching has been naught. We won a competition for the Archdiocese of Dublin proposed to build 15 new churches in the suburbs, in the newly developing suburbs of Dublin City. The site was non-specific, and our proposal was a walled garden. Concrete block wall with a cruciform plan and 4 small gardens with glass walls between the nave, the sanctuary, the rear doss, and the side aisles, and an entrance through the wall under a canopy. That's from the entrance court through the walls to the far garden, through the nave. Another competition at that time was the Prime Minister's house on that site that I told you in the middle of the Phoenix Park. There are 3 houses there already. There was the American Ambassador's house, the President of Ireland's house, and the state recently acquired the house of the Papal Nuncio to Ireland, and propositioned that they would build a house and a state guest house, a house for the Prime Minister and a state guest house, in anticipation of Ireland becoming more involved with a wider and its application to join the European Union. The elevation to in the middle of that drawing is a 2-story house with an elevated clear-story window in an internal courtyard. The 2-story part on the left was the private rooms of the Prime Minister, and the 5 windows, 1, 2, 3, 4, the 7 windows on the right were the public rooms of the house. The top left-hand drawing is the entrance courtyard, the entrance room with a stove and a wall hanging. And in the middle was the other elevation with more wall hangings and a sunshade on the outside, and the Prime Minister's office with books and a table and some pots and a plate with his window to the garden. And the one at the bottom is the entrance to the internal courtyard and the drawings on the right of the bottom ones is the treatment of the window openings in single-story and two-story fenestration. And the building on the right was the four-story state guest house in similar, but the Prime Minister's house was a timber frame. The state guest house was a concrete frame. And the Prime Minister's house was, I mean, I'll have to describe it to you, a square plan with 5 squares by 5 squares. The entrance from a circular forecourt into a hall which had a fireplace and was really a sort of living room. And then coming on this side at the south end of that drawing is the Prime Minister's rooms, his family rooms and his office in the middle. If you count the 5 squares across the bottom, 1, 2, the third room in the middle was the Prime Minister's office. And then the Prime Minister's sitting room, and then his family kitchen, dining, living room, and his own courtyard, the 2-story, completing the 2-story. The top half of the 5 squares, I should also say that there was a perimeter loggia or extension of weathering to protect the timber frame all the way around the 5 squares of the plan. I mean, people like, I'm sure there were French architects that entered that competition, but Zaha Hadid, Edward Jones, Richard Rogers, all the English architects and all the Irish architects entered it. And the competition was won by English firm of architects Shalliff and Evans. There was the Prime Minister changed office shortly after it, and the new Prime Minister scrapped the plan. Sometime after about that time, we had built some other things, and Trinity College were interested in, or set about finding an Irish firm of architects to take over from Aarons, Burton and Corlac. Peter Aarons built probably the most important modern building in Dublin, which is the Berkeley Library in Trinity College, a concrete frame building, an inspiration to all of us working in Dublin. Shortly after our discussions with Trinity College, which were, we had some discussion about the front square and what should happen and what parts of the front square of the collegiate plan, which consisted of a plan of squares and interconnecting residential rooms, and towards the front, the dining hall, the examination hall, the provost's house, and front square, opening onto College Green, opening onto the Bank of Ireland, the Parliament building, leading west from Trinity College to the medieval city and the cathedrals and Dublin Castle. And it's about that area and that several of these projects that I'm going to. And I just want to talk a little bit about this building. This is the dining hall after our work. It consisted of 3 bay windows on 3 windows on the top floor, which is the senior common room, and below the senior common room is the entrance hall. The bays on either side on the right, the one on the right is the staircase, and one on the left is an addendum onto the senior common room and the stairs. It's elevated on a flight of steps over a vaulted basement. The plan of it is, as I said, the flight of stairs, the entrance hall, the hall, and the room on the left off the hall is the kitchen. And the room on the right of the hall and the room on the north of the hall, these are modern extensions. And there are small rooms towards the front on the right in which we were involved. It was our great good fortune that in the middle of our conversations with the college, that over a spring weekend in 1984, the building went on fire. And the college was thrown into convulsions and about the catastrophe that had happened to them and what to do about the future of this building in Front Square in the college. We had had some discussion, we had made some proposals that involved, and the idea was there that in the kitchen, there's a principle involved in this, a small principle in our office, which is that buildings that have assembly place, like a dining hall or a theatre or a room like this, are dependent on the anti-space. I mean, that there is a requirement of at least the equivalent of floor area of the space of the assembled people to foregather and to meet after. And so in relation to the hall, which has become congested and the plan was very confused, and it was probably one of the only buildings in the college that had so much alterations done to it. I must not detain you, but just to say that my description of this building is to do with 3 rooms, which is the hall in the middle, which we reconstructed, facsimile to what was there. That's from the hall, looking through the entrance hall out onto Front Square. And I want to talk momentarily about the floor, about the walls, and the furniture in the hall. And just to refer to this drawing, and which was my lesson in oak joinery. And the drawing on the left is the elevation of the hall and the panelling, 80% of which was salvaged, but much of it was damaged with water. The water was more damaged, and the detail at the bottom is the frame and the panel that I referred to in Chambers building, but which is the paneling of the hall. And the detail on the right was the construction of the skirting of the hall. That's the moldings of the skirting and our proposition, the brick vault underneath, and our proposition to put back underfloor heating in the reconstruction. I have to move fairly quickly on this just to refer back to the paneling and to the reconstruction, the rehanging of the paintings, and the making of the furniture, which included a table. And it's since then the question of the table and the furniture that belongs in a room that is the completion of the architecture of the interior of any building is of very, very profound significance. And there's the table, which was reconstructed from fragments that we found, that the professor of the history of architecture in Trinity pointed to us in the examination hall. The chair is a country chair, an Irish country chair. I mean, we propositioned a bench, and the bench was rejected, I think, because of women and skirts. The second room that I was concerned with is the reconstruction of the anteroom, or the former kitchens, which are now at the north on the back, in this full height, actually higher than the dining hall, because you can see here in the basement of the ground floor of the reconstruction, the first floor is on the level of the hall. Now, I need to explain to you, the hall is on the right, and the windows are on the left. The third floor is an exhibition room, and the fourth floor is private dining rooms associated with the senior common room and other events in the hall. And so I just will refer to this drawing, which sort of describes all the detail, I mean, almost everything about the reconstruction of what we called the atrium is shown in these plans. The elevations on the top of the 2 principal elevations, and one with the stairs, and the other with the 2-story exhibition gallery, and the various floors around it. The architectural interest here, I mean, is what I was discussing with your colleague before I came in. is the question of columns and beams, and the trabeated construction, timber columns, timber beams, and over 4 floors, and the heights of them, and the modulation of the scale of the columns, and the introduction. You can see the scissors staircases on the back wall, and in the time that's available, I just must move quickly. There's the table being set in the private dining room on the top floor. The roof of the kitchen is retained, and we put in some daylight. And I will just take you through the construction, where the columns graduate ever slightly from floor to floor. Behind it, you can see the guarding between the columns, and then the staircases off the back of it. The staircases there, the rails, and the shutters. Then this atrium now is used all the time in all sorts of conditions for assembly, receptions, a theatre, in as it were, in a public space in the square. And the shutters to the exhibition gallery. Now, the third room is the room on the other side of the hall, in those very small rooms off the staircase on the right-hand side of the hall. And I mean, like every architect, I mean, what was in the office was the discussion about, and books that we were reading. I mean, we have American books always in the office, and we have the modern books. I mean, we have a good library, and the debate with the college was altogether on other issues other than a bar for the senior common room, which was the lowest priority on the engagement of the college. And Rachel Chidlow, who I showed you in that photograph with John in the beginning, Rachel said, she said that what Trinity needs is a proper bar. And the academics thought that a drinks cabinet in the corner of the senior common room would be really what. And that was a debate that we ducked, and we sort of quietly said that we'd build a small bar off the common room. Anyway, at a certain moment, it was decided, when the discussion got to, all sorts of planning, and so I said, why don't we just make a mirror copy of Adolf Loos's bar? Loos books and the books of European architecture pre the Bauhaus, as to what was happening when architects were thinking about classical buildings and moving on, and the beginnings of modernism. And Loos was really, really seemed like a very important person who understood the city, building, and construction, and social affair, and society, and Viennese life. Anyway, so the point about the bar, the Vienna bar, is the question of the columns and beams, and the introduction of the mirrors above head height, which extends this tiny room with a small bar into infinity in mirrors. So if you stand high, you can see, you're in this minute bar, and which is exquisitely in Vienna of fine materials, and in Dublin of painted MDF. And that's Andy Richardson from my office, and Eddie McParland. Silk curtains on the lights, uplighters in the tables, and the columns and beams in the roof. Now, moving on to the medieval end of this, moving out of Trinity College up towards the medieval city and to the cathedrals. You're looking from the college, looking west. The river is on your right, and the castle is on your left. That's the new civic offices for Dublin Corporation, the big building on the right. The cathedral is there in the that's Christchurch Cathedral. There are two cathedrals. And then at the entrance to Dublin Castle here, there's a gate leading into this tower, small tower leading into the front courtyard of the castle. And the only thing that resembles anything in Dublin as medieval is bits of the city plan, of the medieval plan. And our street, there was a famous competition for called Temple Bar, and a lot of younger architects got work in Temple Bar, and we were allocated, along with 4 others, part of a block of residential building in Temple Bar. And contrary to the accepted wisdom of the Dublin City Council, in this narrow street that goes from the castle down to the river in the 8th, 10th, and 11th century, the wisdom was 4 stories and 1 story setback. And it seemed to us for possibilities in relation to the castle and so on, and the size of site, that a tower was a much more interesting proposition. So this is a plan for sort of 2 buildings with a split between them. The buildings on the rooms on the left are the 5-story, the 4-story and 1-story setback to adjoin the adjacent, and then there's a split from east to west between it and the tower. And the tower is a 9-story building with a library and an apartment on the top floor, and 2 apartments, a 1-bedroom and a 2-bedroom apartment on each floor on the way down. And the client actually, having sort of listened to what we were talking about in the office, and said they called this the wooden building, and they asked us to build a wooden building in the medieval city. And so it's actually, the proposition is an entrance door and a canopy, so that the wood makes, as it were, a facade, a sort of great entrance to this tower. So the tower is bounded at the top by a canopy, and the ground floor opening through to the courtyard in the middle and the entrance hall to the apartment building. And that's the small building. That's our building on the left, and this is the construction. I mean, building on what we had been at in the atrium in Trinity College, with the canopy protecting the timber at high level, the 2-bedroom. That's the larger. That's the 2-bed. That room that you're looking at is the 2-bedroom. And the timber is graduated, this time not vertically but horizontally, and it is made of paneled and framed doors and shutters and a brick facade for the rest of it. The canopy on the top, I mean, it's incredibly difficult to photograph in a narrow street, and so I really don't have very successful photographs of this building, but that's the top floor. That's the canopy, and that's the facade, the wood facade, which makes the entrance on the ground floor. There it is there in this narrow street, and you see the wood facade. And I mean, when you stand at it and you stand under the canopy, it seems really sort of like a sort of a great piece of architecture. And I mean, once we rise above the rest, then there's other things going on to do with sunshades, glass facades, and a library. Steel and protection and balconies. And the thing, I mean, what is extraordinary in the apartment? We had a party in it for the office shortly before it was sold. We asked, the apartments were sold in an afternoon in an auction in the Shelburne Hotel. They just sold. But the thing, I mean, there's an extraordinary calm in those rooms, which is given by the depth of the windows and the wood, and from looking out of it at other wooden things. And on the top floor, it was bought by an economist, and it has, in order to get the 9th floor, we extended it up to get onto the roof and to get the double height for the books. And the man who bought it at the auction, he said, well, what will I do with the top floor? He came into the office, an economist, a wonderful man, and he said, what do you do? And I said, we actually have the drawings. We want it to be a library. And he said, fine, I'll get my books. This building is an office building in St. Stephen's Green, and it's... Okay. I mean, the point about this is that it's a story about white stone and an office building. John brought me to Helsinki to see Aalto's white building, and he said, if we build on St. Stephen's Green, we have to build in Portland stone, and we have to, and this is the Mellon building and the corner, and we were building on the corner, the Mellon on the left, paneled stainless steel, reinforced concrete, and Aalto on the right. And that's the stone. It's from the deepest end of the quarry, and it's on a corner, making 2 facades to the city, one to the National Concert Hall and the other to the St. Stephen's Green on the right. The south is protected with brise soleil, with stone, with lead covers and shutters. I mean, sorry, a roof to get you from St. Stephen's Green to the Concert Hall. And that's the St. Stephen's Green entrance. From the green, looking to the corner, making a corner in the city, making an entrance to a building. This is a country, this is the library in a country town, and I mean, that's the market house, the great house. This is a planned town with an oval in the middle, and we made, I mean, it was a derelict market house in which we planned a library, a room surrounded with books, with galleries, and a children's storytelling theatre on the top floor. We readjusted the car parking in the town, put the cars, the same number of cars, so the merchants, and made a small gallery on the edge of the market house, and the reading areas and the books on the top floor. This is the small hotel. This is the most westerly island in the Aran Islands, and that's the landscape where fields. I mean, the fields are made of stone walls, and the earth is rock, and the planting is sand and seaweed, and that's drills for potatoes. And that's the plan of our proposal for a small hotel with 7 rooms. And there's a dining room on the end on the left, and on the top is the elevation of it. It's a stone building with a horizontal window. Le Corbusier's horizontal window. And the south side with small white courtyards and a garden in the rock. The dining room there, looking from one island to the other island, built of stone that's taken from the surface of the rock on the island. In Cork, which is there's 2 phases of building in Cork over 14 years. And this is actually a library building that was built in 2 parts. And the library that I'm going to show is the rooms on the left. The rooms on the right were the extension of the library. And that facade is built opposite the existing building and sort of sets off the existing building and makes an entrance to the north end of the campus, which I'll show you now, which is the plans for the new university. You can see our plan on the left here in the aerial shot. Just focus on the circle, on the green circle in the middle of it, and the white building below the circle is the library building, and then the existing buildings were there, and the whole northern half of that was, as I said, 14 years of work. The track was also part, and the external circulation. Now, I need to take a moment to explain. In the bottom right is the library in two parts. The library has a reading room on the south and the book stacks on the north. And then there's the extension of it forming that crescent to the existing buildings. Now, the proposal for the new buildings were in successive competitions. We won we got appointed to build different buildings and to make a master plan for the college. And we did this work in association with a firm of architects in Cork called Boyd Barrett Murphy O'Connor. And Brian Murphy O'Connor, who was a very elegant figure and distinguished architect who took over an old practice in Cork, and they came to us and said, would we join forces with them to work on this? And I mean, having finished the library successfully, then came to the plan for the new building. And Brian Murphy O'Connor called me into his office and he said, what will we do now? So I said, we'll have to think. I said, we've got a crescent, but we've got this big site, and there's several different commissions to be had. And the commissions are, on the top right is the administration building. On the top left is a tourism faculty, a faculty for the tourism and catering department. And the bottom left is a student center. And I'll take a moment in a short while to discuss that. But I just want to tell you a funny story for a moment. Brian Murphy O'Connor, who you might remember his name, because his first cousin was Cardinal Murphy O'Connor, the Archbishop of Westminster, and a cardinal of the Catholic Church. And Brian said, I mean, he said to me, so I went away and I came back and I said, I'd make a model. And I made a model, you see, and I made a model, sort of small wooden model, with the circle in the middle. And he said, what? He asked me about a circle, and then he gradually, he took it in and he said, goodness, Shane, he says, it's like the Vatican. He said, we'll do it. Now, these buildings were built separately, and this drawing was made after the drawings were done, because always what was intent was that these were not separate buildings. And although they were built some of them were built years apart, the purpose was to make a sort of architecture that was really like a small town, with a circle or a square in the middle. And one of the features of it is the rock or the landscape on which it was built. And it was stepped, and that led to some features of the management of the earth and the ground. The building on the right is the administration building, and that's the council room on the top that projects above. The building in the middle is in the courtyard, which addresses the courtyard, is the tourism faculty, and that's the rest of the tourism faculty, and in particular the kitchens on the left. And just show you the library. The reading room is on the left, and the book stacks are on the right. The reading room, where the crescent varies, the column widths become vary, and sort of step at irregular intervals between the central passage, which is which open to the books on the left, and the reading, and then the books on the higher level going around. The book stacks actually contain study places and reading within them. It seems to me that it's a mistake to think of a library as anything other than the European Asplund or the British Library, a room surrounded with books, and that the stacks are never a warehouse. I've spoken about that, and I must move on. Other than to say that the plan is engaged with I mean, is that the circle is made of a brick wall, and the buildings are sort of spun or hang out off that, but the openings of the wall make gates which send signals to the rest of the campus. And the opening in the V at the top right is the entrance, is the main entrance to the college. And then there's an entrance to there are actually two entrances to the tourism building. There's one straight from the outside onto the long passage. Each of the buildings are defined by their long passage. They're generally single-story and sometimes two-story, although the admin is three-story, but the passages which are top-lit. Much of the whole of the plan is top-lit. And that's the entrance to the hall. That is the school. That's the college. That's what you know the college by. And the building at the far side is the student center. And that's the window, the square window is the student union. And the colonnade is the entrance to the student building. And the entrance that's the gate that photograph was taken from the other entrance to the tourism building. And this is where it joins with the end of the library and an existing gymnasium that was there that we have, and the view making the entrance to the rest of the hall. And then the garden of the library and the enclosure of the entrance hall. And you see, I mean, the wonderful thing is the asymmetry of the plan. The circle disposed, the garden, the lawn moved out of the center, giving this great flight of stairs given by the stone, by the rock on which the building, and the entrance then to the west to the sports hall, to the track and playing fields, and there's that's the west gate, the entrance to the student union, the students, and then the tourism building on the right. The entrance to the college, the two entrances to the tourism building, and the entrance to the under the council room to the administration. The administration building is in reinforced concrete. The other buildings are all masonry. The council room and the access staircase are in concrete and stainless steel and oak railings. The furniture of the council room and the view from the main room of the council room to the students at the other end, the access to the brick vaults. And the student union essentially consists of a multi-purpose hall with shops, rooms for societies, restaurants, and a bar. The vaulted, in this case, over the student union, circular brick vaults with roof light, and the colonnade to the student on the upper level, and a restaurant on the ground, students' rooms on the, and the entrance to the hall. And I will finish I just want to show the dining hall with the roof light and the kitchens, which are 7 kitchens, and the demonstration kitchen, which is the curved kitchen, which is to do with the Padua, in the anatomy theatre in Padua. Stainless steel kitchens, and the anatomy theatre, or the demonstration theatre with the large table for the master chef teaching, and the chimneys for the extract. And thank you for listening to me.
Merci, Sean. C'était très. It was very cruel just to stop you because it's really very beautiful. Mais Sean a offert à la Maison de l'Architecture une magnifique boîte comme ça, que vous pouvez retrouver dehors, et on peut voir tous ces magnifiques buildings, tous ces magnifiques projets, retrouver les photos, un peu plus les plans que vous avez montrés dehors, the beautiful box that you sent to the Maison de l'Architecture. Now I will ask to Shelley McNamara, whose plane finally arrived, to come.
know, did they hear us all? Did they hear us all? Were they there all the time?
Yeah.
Hi, Shane. Nice to see you.
Hello.
Hello.
I just...
I didn't realize my
very short
microphone
because
was on.
we want to let you the most time possible, so you can...
I have to be very short.
No, you have to take your time. It's okay.
Okay.
It's half an hour.
Half an hour. Okay.
Please.
Thank you.
To leave
Sorry,
Taka
can
a
you
bit.
help me before you go?
Sorry?
Can you help me? This is next. And does the pointer work?
The pointer, and I think it's
It doesn't work.
back next. I think it's
Okay.
should be okay.
And I can use this also
This
to
I don't
change?
know.
No.
Comment ça marche? Je sais pas.
It's okay.
Laura?
I can use this.
Yes, you can use this.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe like that, no?
Maybe
Look,
the
works.
audience should. It's fine. The audience might understand that we've been traveling all day and we've come straight into this room. So we're settling. I've never shared a platform with Shane de Blacam, and as we were entering, Shane was talking about teaching and the way that he taught, and that some of the students were terrified. And the first year I ever taught in the School of Architecture, I was teaching with Shane, and I was terrified because he's such a great architect, and he has a very strong presence and very strong, clear way of thinking, and I had no idea what I was doing. So I hope I can follow. And the buildings that de Blacam and Marr have made in Dublin and in Ireland have been astonishing for us as students and as practicing architects. And they've brought a real sense of craft into the culture of architecture, I think in a way that no other previous architects did. So, our practice has evolved over the years. Having spent 25 years practicing in Ireland and in Dublin, we then were given opportunities to work outside of Ireland. And these sections that you're looking at, these hieroglyphs or diagrams, in a way describe the way that we think. And what we have here, sorry, I thought that was a pointer. What we have are the thinking sections. And Shane showed some beautiful plans, but for one reason or another, we found ourselves starting with sections to try to understand the nature of the spaces that we wanted to make. So what you're looking at are the sketches of the projects that I'm going to show you. The top left is a building in Dublin, which is a headquarters building. The middle top is a School of Economics in Toulouse. The top right is a School of Economics in London. The sketch below that is a University of Engineering in Lima, in Peru. The little colored section in the middle is a townhouse, student townhouse in Kingston University in the UK. The model below that is a school of engineering and architecture in Arkansas. And the bottom left is the first project we did outside of Ireland, which is a School of Economics in Milan. So in there is the kind of beginnings of each of these projects. And what we find the challenge in practice to be is to somehow, these are hard won, they're not beautiful drawings, but they're hard won, and it's trying to capture in one sketch what it is we're trying to do, and the challenge always is to try to hold on to the world that's trying to get out of those little drawings. And this building, first building I'm going to show you, is the headquarters for the electricity supply board in Ireland. And I'm just showing you a photo of our city, and using a text that we use from Raphael Moneo, which we really love, where he talks about the city that accompanies you, the city you travel in and with. In other words, that what way we take that is that we're anchored in our own culture, and we bring that with us, and we use that as the baggage for us to be able to see new places that we go to. And the first models that we made of this project, these are competition models, but really describe the challenge of the project, which was to bring a very large-scale development into a very small-scale grain of 18th century Dublin. This street was demolished in the 1960s. There was a 1960s building which replaced it. It was not loved. It was demolished, and we were really repairing I suppose, let's say, the emotional damage, actually, more than physical damage that happened at that period. So we were really doing a restoration project, but what we were restoring was gone. And it was a very strange project for us because we had to seriously investigate our own language again in a fresh way. And the bottom section describes the intention of what we were trying to do, which was to not make an office block, but to make a piece of city, to make a piece of Dublin. And Dublin is a city of houses, as you can see from the last, actually I should say from the last image. There's something that really helped us was reading a book by writer Elizabeth Bowen called 7 Winters. And it's about how she, as a 7-year-old child, perceived this city. And she used a fantastic phrase that the houses seemed like a kind of unbroken cliff, and that Dublin always seemed to her like it was absorbing the light in the way that, or sealing up the light in the way that an unopened orange would seal up the juice. And sometimes when you read about your own city by somebody who's not an architect, an artist or a writer, you rediscover something about the feeling of your own city and how you might start to interpret it. So in this context, which is houses and gardens, historically, we had to make a 45,000 square meter single-use building, which is just offices. And so the grain of the city was the starting point. And the taller blocks on the model show that to the street to the rear, we made 4 fragmented blocks trying to pick up this 7.5 meter grain, which is more or less common throughout the whole of Dublin. So we work on 7.5, 15 meters and set up that rhythm of windows and doors. And even though it's an office building, we've made many entrances, because there were many entrances there. There were 16 houses, 16 doors. And when you take away doors and thresholds in a city, it's like the rhythm is disturbed. The rhythm is destroyed, you could say. So we put back the same rhythm of window and door. But also what's interesting about Dublin, it is not a perfect city. Because of our history, the land was always leasehold. So builders would have made 10 houses or 6 houses or 20 houses, all to the same pattern, but all slightly different. So it's the same, there's repetition, but there's also continual difference. And there's this lovely soft weave about the rhythm of buildings in Dublin. And then to the street at the back, which is a new street, you see the end grain of the tall blocks, which is like the end grain of the dark brown brick, which the gables of the end grain of the Georgian streets, which are so beautiful and quite monumental. And while this appears as a wall externally, there are 6 courtyards within the form. So when you come through, this is the colonnade which we made. So we had solid building, then courtyard, solid building, courtyard, solid building, courtyard. And these buildings were connected by a 4.5 meter deep colonnade. And this was to hold the wall of the street, but at the same time to bring the life of the city into the solidity of the block. And so this is the way of somehow making, allowing the solidity of the street to be repaired, but at the same time to have the surprise of moving into an interior which has gardens and open spaces. So you come through what you think is a solid wall into what feels like a garden, and there's that surprise of moving from the external street, which is restored, into another world, which is 6 courtyards and office workers and sunken gardens. And it feels like a kind of old landscape, and it's a remnant of the traditional grain of the house and garden. And then the next project, this building in Toulouse was happening almost exactly at the same time as the building in Dublin. And in Toulouse, we found a brick city of a completely different type. This was done, the first project we did directly after building in Milan. And as you know, Milan is a very rational city, and it's a very heroic city. And it was a language that we understood, of streets and squares and grids. But somehow Toulouse really stretched us, because it's a very picturesque city. It has the wonderful huge river, the Midi Canal. It has a plan like a broken heart. It has these wonderful brick churches and brick walls. And that was a real challenge for us, how we could move from our city, the one Maneo says we bring with us, and how we could move from that and make a building in Toulouse. But one of the other things we find quite encouraging in thinking about working outside of Ireland is the way that Samuel Beckett thought about language. He talked about working in foreign language, which is French for him, that had brought him out of the familiar into what he called a more primal territory, or more primal sounds of the words. So there is that thing of being anchored in one place, but then going to a place which is not familiar, and that draws on another kind of layer of perception that you've developed from discovering and rediscovering your own place, and then going to a new place and trying to see it afresh. So this was again our early model. We found we were at a junction between the old city, which is the Roman city, which has a very tight grain, very tight organic grain, and the new city. And we were right beside the medieval wall. And the site had no orthogonal form, let's say. And so we started to think about, and this came from visiting buildings in Toulouse, we started to think about making something that would anchor the building into the ground. We found that there were buttresses and gables in Toulouse, and we used our fire stairs to make these buttresses and gables. And there was a beautiful column in the church of Saint Etienne, which was this huge column, and we thought about making a central pivot and making this feel like a kind of inhabited sundial. And this is the way it sits itself into the city, again, the brick city of Toulouse, with these beautiful retaining walls, raised streets with mature trees beside a weir, and how we could find ourselves and taking our place overlooking that space. The pointer doesn't work, but if you see the 3 black blocks, this is where we're located, between what we would call the old city to the right the new university, which is north of our building, a broken block to the south between us and the Garonne. There's a plan of a church there, which is a Romanesque church, and then the black line is the medieval wall. And these are the fragments that we found in Toulouse, the big column of Saint-Étienne, the beautiful spaces which are outside and inside at the same time. This is Saint-Jacobin, one of the rooms, the spaces attached to the cloister of Saint-Jacobin, which is an extraordinary building. And then the tiny blocks in the old Roman city where the biggest window is to the sky, and it's really, really tight grain, and the brick buttresses. And so we started to construct this project almost in fragments, trying to see how could we bring these elements that we found, how could we use them and bring them together to make a project. So the big plan, if you see the 6 boxes at the edge, we thought of those as being like 6 feet. They're the buttresses, the staircases, the fire stairs. Because architecture is a very practical thing. You need escape and you need safety and all of those things. And then the lift shaft we used as the kind of pivotal anchor in the middle, and everything else rotates around, except that there's a bias to the river. The foreground is the lecture theatres, which overlook the river, and the background, the offices, which are stacked. And one of the other things that we find is really important, well, first of all, there's the climate, because Toulouse is hot and doesn't get really cold. Sometimes it has no wind, and sometimes it's very windy. And all the beautiful spaces we went to were effectively external spaces. They were courtyards, or there were staircases accessed from courtyards with a gate into a staircase and no door until you get to the top, and you were always outside. And so we made the central hall an external space, protected from wind and rain, but outside, where you feel the breeze or the life of the city. And it was also important for us to try to think about choreographing the city beyond. And that's something that we're really concerned about, is this thing of how do you connect with the place that you are? How can you bring the city into the building? And how can the inhabitants relate out to their world beyond? And there's an architect, Laurent Baudouin, a French architect that we really admire, and he writes beautifully about architecture. He was writing about Sverre Fehn, and he talked about the pace of human time is much faster than time in nature, talking about the clouds and the tides and the seasons, and that as humans we're out of sync with time in the time, let's say, dimension in nature. And what he described is that architecture is a machine for slowing time down. And there's something very interesting about that you can make a place where you feel you can stop and where your feet are on the ground. And especially for students, because we work a lot with, we've had the luck to do a lot of buildings related to students and student life, and there's that thing of calm and stability and always connected to the bigger world, that you're not too compressed or internalized in your world. And so the cracks that we've made, some of them are tiny cracks between blocks, which are offices for professors, but the fact that you still get a connection to the city beyond was something really important for us in this, what we called an inhabited sundial. And the brick that we've used here is very different to the brick we've used in Dublin. We used the same brick. We found a brick factory right beside Toulouse, which makes exactly the same brick as the medieval wall. We found the same mortar for the pointing, and we used this. There's many different color bricks in the new building to try and get the richness of the medieval wall. And this wall was engineered to meet current codes, which you're obviously all familiar with, in terms of brick construction. And the image on the top right describes the element of coming into this entrance hall, which is external with a window to the sky. It's the windows to the sky is framed by what we call the sky cloister, which winds its way down through the staircases, which are social staircases, but also fire stairs, and then wrap around the ground floor so that you get this thing of spiraling in section as well as plan. And all the circulation spaces are external, except when you move into the office zones and each of the individual lecture theatres. Sorry. Am I pointing at the wrong thing? What am I doing wrong? Shane, you've used up the battery.
Just before? You want to be
I
before?
Maybe? Yeah, just go back.
Why can't we go back? Is it here or?
It's you.
If we do that.
Ah.
Wait, it's good here. Sorry. Is there any? Il n'y a pas un technicien, quelque chose? Why does it work here?
I don't know, they're not in sync.
Ah, yeah.
We'll have to bring the audience up onto the stage.
Qu'est-ce qui fait ça? Si on recommence.
Okay.
Ils sont en train de regarder là-bas? I think they are doing
Fixing
something upstairs.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. How am I doing on time? The time, okay? Don't know.
Still 10 minutes?
10 minutes left. Okay. This is our building in, I should say actually that those two brick buildings started at the same time and finished at the same time, and both of them took 10 years to build. So patience is one of the qualities or demands of an architect. So this next project we started in 2015 by competition. It's a school of economics in London. It's funny, if you do, it's like a chicken and egg situation as an architect. If you've done one school of economics, people think you maybe can do another one. So one thing leads to another, which is actually very unfair in a way, and it's strange the way the projects are given. We're not complaining; these are all won by competition, but it is unusual that we would have done so many schools of economics. This is on Lincoln's Inn Fields in London, a really challenging place to make a project. 55-metre frontage onto this public space. And on the left is the map that we made of the site. Ours is the little diagonal building overlooking Lincoln's Inn Fields. At the top is the John Soane Museum, which is an extraordinary building, which we've always loved, and we really felt that John Soane was watching us and that we had better do a good project. So we worked very hard at that. And on the right is a little chapel called Lincoln's Inn Chapel. And what we found about that little chapel was that gave us the clue of what we might do in this very interesting university where the streets are full of students, and the university happens as much on the streets as it does in the buildings. And we felt we were at the kind of gateway between the smaller, almost medieval-like streets and the release of Lincoln's Inn Fields. And we thought about the building, it's the one on the right-hand side, being like a palazzo overlooking the overlooking the square. Somebody needs to help me here. Oh. Okay. So this is the undercroft of the chapel. And what we found really amazing about this is there was no door, and the staircase was the little staircase in the middle, which was to one side, and the door to the chapel was at the top of the stairs. And there was something really magic about that you could come into a space and that the door to the main room would be above, and that this space was related to the city. And we were also looking at other parts of London, like the Royal Courts of Justice, which is an incredibly intricate building. And we were looking at this thing of how could we make a connection with this city. And so the first thing we thought about was to make a space which would allow the city to enter. And this is actually a transfer structure between an enormous sports hall below ground and the whole 5-6 floors of offices up above. So we made a space from the transfer structure. Instead of hiding that within the depth of a floor slab or something, because we were going from a 20-metre span on the lower ground to a 7.5-metre span on the upper floors. And so we thought, well, if we can move through this transfer structure, that it could be an amazing space. So this is 15-metre span, so we started at 20 metres, then 15, and then it goes down and down and down to 7.5. And we were also thinking about this idea of making a free space and not having a door and being able to move up the staircase before you were controlled, and that it would feel like a part of the city, and that it would also have that sense of mass and weight. It's something that we've been really interested in is what we call structuring space, that structure is the basis of the quality of the space that you make. And getting that contrast between a sense of mass bearing down and being held up, and then sometimes trying to defy that gravity. So that it's about gravity, but it's also about trying to make a space feel extremely light, as well as having that same sense of weight. So they're like tree trunks. They developed like trees, where the branches get smaller as they move up, and the weight is distributed diagonally on those branches, which start on the lower level. And there's these tiny little seats built into the wall, which we call the Bramante seats, so students can retreat to the edges or they can occupy the central main space. And this section shows the 4 worlds. The big sports hall on the lower ground, let's call it the free space, we called it, which is at street level, 2 teaching floors, and then the staircase gets smaller and smaller, and the crack in the movement gets smaller and smaller, and we have the 6 floors of teaching and research spaces up above. So it's almost like they're 4 separate worlds with 4 different kinds of structure, or a structure that recedes and gets smaller as it moves. And when we finished this building, we were asked to do an exhibition in the Sohn Museum. And the exhibition we made was Neighbours in Space and Time, because we were across from Lincoln's Inn Fields. It was suggested to us that we could think about the Sohn building and the building that we had just finished. And what was fantastic was that we learned so much about Sohn. We had access to drawings that you wouldn't normally have access to. And we found this amazing image which we could look at for hours, and the way it described the Sohn Museum as a house. We're not saying that what we did feels like a house, but it led us to taking a cloud survey of the finished building of the Marshall Building, which is the one we have completed. And this is an amazing, we were trying to see how you could capture the life of a space in a similar kind of way. And this cloud survey shows the big stairs moving up to the teaching rooms and the smaller circulation space. It's just showing the more or less the circulation space. And how that comes back to a piece of London and how that could enter into the world that we're making, and that there's that intimacy of a student sitting in a niche in a wall, which we call the Bramante seats, like the Bramante cloister, which has this beautiful built-in stone seat in the wall, and the spiral stair where there's no control, everybody can walk up, and where it's wide enough and generous enough for large numbers of students to move safely up and down. And then before the Lincoln's Inn Fields building, we had done what's called the townhouse in Kingston in London. So this was our first project in the UK. Very different university to the London School of Economics. A very different demographic in Kingston, where many of the students are first-generation university students. Many of them don't have good facilities in terms of home, facilities, places to work at home. They travel long distances to get to the university, and so the university wanted to make a house which would feel like a home for the students, where they could come and be there, not just for lectures, but for a whole day. And the plan on the right-hand side shows there's a long strip of white circles, which are trees, where the car parking was removed by the university, and a new public space of 200 meters long was made. And the main thing about this project was deciding to make what was to be the lecture theatre, to be the heart of the project and not to be a closed box, and also to make a colonnade, which it's a very ugly road. There's no quality because it's been destroyed by road engineers. And so we used the technique or the element of the loggia as a way of making an edge which would feel porous. And this relates across in its color and hopefully in its dignity or civic sense to Surrey County Hall, which was beautiful Portland stone directly across from our building. So that was our touchstone as to what level we would try to reach. The idea of making a townhouse for students was a really beautiful, generous way of thinking by the university. It was to be a democratic space, the whole building. It's a library, but it's combined with dance, including urban dance, which is extremely loud. And rather than making these as separate things, we made one, let's say, one framework. And the wish was that it would feel really open, that it would have no doors, and that it would invite both the town, Kingston, and the passers-by, and the people waiting for the buses, and the students, that it would be open 24 hours a day and 365 days a year, and it's designed for that. So it's a very enlightened client, let's say, a very enlightened educationalist we found. And one of the things, the other French architects, I'm not just speaking about French architects because I'm here, but we love the work of Auguste Perret, and we love Salle Cortot, which he did. And in thinking about looking at about the central space, which is, it's not for music, it's an event space, but we were looking at the way that he was influenced by the Bouleuterion and the Greek small amphitheatre for senators to meet, carved out of rock, and the proximity of the audience with the stage. So that was something we started with. And looking at the competition section, we were also thinking about how to somehow allow the audience or the spectators for the events, which are anything from fashion to dance to lectures, how the audience level could connect floors and how we could make that a very steep space. But it was really also thinking about what kind of building could we make which would allow adaptability and flexibility for the university. So we talked about this as being like a warehouse of ideas. So it's a very ordinary concrete frame, 6.5 meter centers in one direction, then it goes from 4.5 to 6.5 to 10 to 15. But again, it's a very loose organization. All the volumes can be adjusted. It's very deep plan, 55 meters by 55, so we have to take light from above when we get to the middle. And the colonnade steps with the section of the buildings. It's not a flat colonnade. It goes from single story to 3-story. And so the students can move out and be outside, and it makes that threshold space between what is an uncivilized road, and it also makes the gardens on the upper level, where these students have taken as their own, because they have many different departments in this university, as I say, including fashion and dance, and they just take over the colonnade and use it. And the central democratic space is visually open between dance and library, so you can see the dancers rehearsing and practicing. The bar on the upper level of the right-hand image it's a practicing corridor where students come to practice. And the Bouleuterian ancient Greece, just that thing of making something very rudimentary, which would allow students to use this all day. And it's closed, the doors open and close, but students can sleep there, they can eat there, they can have conversations there, and that it's their space, it's their territory. And that dance and library can coexist, and it brings about fantastic kind of differences that happen. Like you find dancers hugging columns and stretching in strange ways in strange places, and that's beside the library, which gets quieter and quieter as you move up. And moving on from that to Lima, but I've just put the Bocconi University on the left-hand side, which was our first project outside of Ireland. It was probably about 15 times bigger than anything we'd ever done before. The biggest building we'd ever built was 1,000 square meters, and this started out at 45,000 square meters and ended up over 60. And just speaking to my colleagues, Alice and Cian on the way, just the whole thing of procurement now and the possibility of younger architects accessing work is so difficult. This is a private university, but at the same time they believed in us, and they saw our 1,000 square meter building and said, okay, you can do it. And we were discussing on our way here that in architecture there's no scale and quantity, doesn't matter. I mean, architecture, it's either there or it's not in whatever you're doing. Bocconi was a horizontal university built in layers. We thought about the ground as being erupting kind of geology, where the big auditoria would be in the ground, and then that all of the offices would float above like a kind of attic level. And in Lima we did the opposite, which is to make a vertical university because the site was tiny. And again, the climate in Milan is much colder and foggier in the winter than Toulouse, so we were able to think about public space differently in Toulouse to what we did in Milan, although a lot of Milan is open. It's the kind of in-between space where again, in that university, you can walk through the university by day. In Lima, it's, as I say, it's a vertical structure. It's seismic. We thought about it being like a football stadium or a viaduct or a kind of piece of infrastructure within which teaching spaces could happen. And it starts with its feet solid on the ground, and it gets thinner as it moves up. And just to go back to Bocconi for a moment, just thinking about gravity and structure, And what we found about the Bocconi University is how the way that we make structure can draw the city into the body of an internal space. And that auditorium spans, it's a cantilever of 22 meters, cantilevers out over the street and draws the city into it. And it's taking up its place in a very, you could say, ordinary street in Milan, which is, sorry, did you say something to me? No, sorry, okay, I better move quickly. So jumping from that to Toulouse to Lima, you can imagine what that might be like. And in Lima, we found this amazing city, which is a cliff, which is 40 meters above the Pacific. So the city is 40 meters above the sea. And the road that runs along the bottom is a new road. So there originally was not a connection between the city and the sea. And there's fog in Milan and there's fog in Ireland, but nothing like the fog in Lima. The fog in Lima comes down and the city disappears. And it's a different kind of fog because it refracts the light and it hurts your eyes. And it's not wet fog. It's a different kind of fog. And it's a different kind of cliff. The Cliffs of Moher in the part of Ireland that I come from, and Shane, his hotel is directly across from the Cliffs of Moher. Those rocks aren't going anywhere. But in Lima, it feels like the whole thing could slip away into the sea because it's a desert city. But what's amazing about it is that it's a moderate city because it's on the Van Humboldt current, and that top drawing on the right-hand side is something that we discovered and looked at a lot when we were doing this project because Alexander Van Humboldt was an amazing person and made these amazing drawings of climate and landscape and species, and was the first person to be able to make a drawing which described scientifically, but described visually, the nature of the Earth and the interconnections between all of the different components of the Earth. And we're very cautious about working in places we've never been to. We'd never been to Peru. But again, we found it really interesting when we found the image of Machu Picchu, the left-hand side image, beside the image of Skellig Michel, which is a Irish monastic settlement in the Atlantic coast, and just saw the connection between humanity and how people inhabit. In the end, human beings need security, need protection within hostile landscapes. So we studied a lot the nature of the landscapes of Lima, and in the end we made this protective edge which backs onto a hostile road and made intimate terraces and layers for the teaching spaces. And it's nothing like any city we've been on before. There's no way you could enter from the main road because it's just hostile and full of traffic. And it's a vertical university because the scale of the site, it's a kind of banana or boomerang-shaped site, so the only way was up. And so we made the structure starting in the basement with its seismic isolators, getting narrower and narrower as it moved up, drawing light from the north, but also providing shade. And what's like the fog in Lima, what's also really interesting is that you walk into a building which feels perfect from the outside, but inside it feels solid because you can't see the sky because of the section. We were worried about the sky and the heat, but we wanted to trap the light. And so it feels perfect outside, but it feels solid inside, like a kind of cliff or a piece of geology. And just to finish, just comparing how sometimes projects connect with each other even though you don't expect them to, like the model of Lima, when we put it beside the model of Arkansas. I mean, the university we're doing in Arkansas is a completely timber building, and the university in Lima is a concrete building. But somehow there's some connection, trying to make even when you have many floors, that a university would feel like a single place, that students can overlook and see and meet each other, and that it doesn't have the tyranny of floor plates. And that's the basis of the Arkansas building. And when we did this competition, we found this architect we never knew before called Faye Jones, who made this beautiful chapel. And not only is it beautiful, but it's also incredibly intelligent, because it's made from small members which 2 men could carry through a forest to make this chapel. And it looks like an outdoor space, but it's glazed. And we just thought this was really beautiful. And then we were also looking at the bric-a-brac of the buildings that you see across the States, which are industrial buildings, and how could we make something. The program for this was to make a big working yard. It's been considered as a kind of a vessel for teaching, to teach engineers and architects how to work with wood, because in Arkansas they're surrounded by forests, but their industry is not geared towards building buildings for many different various reasons. And so the working yard, the reason for the lean-to or the stepped roof was to bring the academic rooms into the working yard, even though they're very different in terms of noise and dust and all of those things, but that it would feel like one place, and that somehow has the sense of the timber and the story of timber, and it gets light from the north because it's very hot, but it's also really wet. And so the gutters, the gutters are beams which take away the water and hold up the roof. So the gutters are like big long canoes, we call them, which are prefabricated. And so the gutter was a very important part of the project. In Ireland, we're kind of scared of rain because sometimes it's horizontal. And when you build in the west of Ireland, you have to be really careful. So we wanted to get that water away fast. And this is our first all-timber building, which is on site, and which has a civic quality as well as a workman-like quality. And we're working with local architects called Modus, who are fantastic support, and this is onto the main road. And again, this idea started in Bacony of being able to see into the workshop, to see the bric-a-brac. And we're just finishing with this image, something partly to do with Auguste Perret talking about making a building that would sing like a violin. And we were doing a competition many years ago, and we actually found a website where you could look at the spaces inside a violin. And this is a space inside a violin. And we also found in recent times a story by E.T.A. Hoffmann, a 19th century fantasist. It's called the Cremona violin, and it's about a man, a musician and a composer, who buys really good violins and he dissects them because he's looking for the secret of the music. And I think that's what we seem to spend our time doing, dissecting buildings, trying to find the secret of the project. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. C'est bon, c'est bon. Voilà. J'invite Taka, Alice Kazé et Kian Deegan. Kian, c'est ça? Kian, yeah. Kian. C'est pas Sian, hein, c'est Kian. Voilà. Thank you. We're sorry we're in time. And, je parle en français peut-être. Ça va réduire un peu le temps du débat, mais je pense que vraiment c'est tellement passionnant. Et moi j'ai vu leur travail, c'est aussi passionnant. Donc allez-y, allez-y.
Merci. Thank you. And thank you for the invitation to speak here. And it's an honor to share the stage with Shane and Shelley. I think there's probably no more daunting a task for an Irish architect than to speak after the Blacam and Grafton architects. So, but we'll give it a go. Just changing the scale a lot. We're a very small practice, 5 people in total. We started our practice in 2008 when there was a very deep recession in Ireland. We started, like many practices do, making houses and extensions for friends and family. But since then, we've managed to make other types of buildings, sports buildings, school buildings, or university buildings, none of which are very big. But I think we were asked to speak here on the subject of transmission, subtitled something along the lines of how we share, or the sharing of architectural values and ideas. So since we are speaking with 2 practices who have been extremely influential to us, we thought it might be interesting to very briefly start on some of our connections to them. This is my local church where I grew up in an outer suburb of Dublin, and by completely random chance, it's also, I believe, one of the first built projects by the Blacam architects. I distinctly remember as a young child being bored in Mass and getting up and running in between the columns and in between the columns and the glass, and then being told to sit down and spending hours upon end looking up at the ceilings and how the structure, how the timber would rest on the concrete and hang out towards the glass. And the kind of clarity but interestingness of it, I think, is something that was definitely not lost on me. This is the plan, as Shane has already shown, of the church in Furhouse. And I think it's a deceptively simple building. There's 6 concrete table structures which make up the cruciform of the interior of the church itself. And then there's a perimeter of diaphragm concrete block wall, which makes the walled garden and then holds the gardens between the outer wall and the inner church. And I remember people in the area they weren't huge fans of the outside of the building. They used to refer to it as the factory because it just had a blank concrete wall. But without fail, everybody loved the interior of the church and sitting amongst the garden in Mass, which was no small feat for a modern building in Ireland at that time. Fast forward about 30 years, myself and Alice, along with Tom DePuer and Peter Mabry, were selected to curate the 2010 Irish Pavilion in Venice Biennale. And we chose the subject of the work of de Blacam and Marr. And I think this was, a shared love of their work amongst the curators, but also to kind of, I suppose, it's very difficult to overstate the importance and the influence of de Blacam and Marr on Irish architecture since they've made work. And I think we wanted to recognize this, but also share their portfolio and their incredible body of work through to a wider audience in Venice. So we made many, many copies of a selection of their archive work, archive photography, new essays, and critically also a selection of their exquisite construction drawings, which are so fundamental in making the character of their buildings. And these were free to take by anybody, and they were set on these pallets which raised the paper up above the Acqua Alto in Venice. And then jumping back to Furhouse, this is our second ever project. It's a small house for a friend of mine, and this photo is taken from the front door of the house where I grew up. And I think on reflection, this house shares a lot with Furhouse Church. I mean, it has a very austere blank exterior, but then that materiality changes as you move to the interior. This is the plan of that house. And although I know Shane isn't a big fan of this plan, it nevertheless owes a lot of debt to the Furhouse Church with the blank perimeter wall and then the internal freestanding structure. And I think in a way it shares other things with Furhouse Church in that a lot of people in the area don't like the outside, but they really like it when they go inside it. This is our first project, 2 houses, a refurbishment of a Victorian-era existing house on the right-hand side, and then we had to build a new build Muse house, which is shown on the left-hand side there, with a shared garden between it. It was for Alice's extended family. And at this time, and I think still, we were really interested in construction, the act of making, and how that could quietly communicate something. So if you see the back wall of the Victorian house, it's made from a type of brickwork called Flemish bond brickwork. And this is Flemish bond brickwork. And as you probably know, like when these houses or these buildings were being built, this wall did everything. It was the structure, it was the thing that kept the rain out, it was the thing that kept the heat in. But now when we build, for better or worse, in layered structures. There's a structural layer, an insulation layer, and a weathering layer. And we wanted to express that somehow in the new building, so it shared some DNA with the old building, but was speaking of its own time. So we conceptually separated the brickwork into 2 layers and located one on the lane side with the projecting bricks and the other to the rear with the open weave bricks through which some ventilation happens to some of these rooms. And I guess maybe seeing that brick house, Shelley and Yvonne, when they were doing their Biennale in 2018, they must have seen some kind of connection to this architect, which is Rogelio Salmona, who is a Colombian architect who worked in the second half of the 20th century and made really incredible brickwork buildings. And we were part of a show within Grafton's wider Biennale show, where there was a group show of a selection of practicing Irish architects who were each given a project from a 20th century architect and asked to reflect upon it and make something for the exhibition. So we were given Rogelio Salmona, and this is the piece that we made on reflection on his work. I don't really have time to go into it in great depth, but when we were researching Salmona's work, which actually incidentally we didn't know until Shelley and Yvonne showed his work to us, he was interested both with contemporary Colombian architecture, but also looking back to pre-Columbian architecture, so like Mayan and Incan civilizations. And that kind of resonated with us, that you can be looking at a specific place, but also have another eye on a different time or a different place when making work. So we were looking at things like Tikal, which is this incredible Mayan temple in Guatemala, which had it's a very small room that has an incredible, what's called a head comb, which just makes presence of the building, but also the dry stone walls of the Aran Islands in the west of Ireland, where Shane showed his beautiful hotel in. And also we were making an installation out of brick, but it was temporary, so you can't use the typical brick of mortar and, you know, the typical way. It's too heavy, it's too solid, it's too permanent. So we looked at trying to tease out a new language of temporary brick work, which is brick slips, which are tied to a series of wires and an armature behind. And here you can see some of plaster casts of the references we were looking at amongst them, yeah. And then, so we're really kind of always being fascinated by this, you know, the act of tethering or tying in architecture and its possibilities. And this comes really, I think, first acknowledged in vernacular Irish cottages with thatch roofs, but only in the west of Ireland. They have to be tied down because of the extremely high winds there, otherwise the thatch would be blown away. And we think it kind of gives a kind of an incredible visual or textural delicacy to architecture that's rarely seen, but it's also grounded in a very pragmatic or use-based idea. So that's something that we really enjoyed and something we got to explore at full scale, I suppose, in the small extension where we tethered the canopy back up to the building, but also tethered it down into the garden. So you get this kind of I suppose, overlapping of building and landscape, which is something that we're also very interested in. So I think, you know, our practice is very interested in local Irish culture, and the projects are very much framed by their locality, but that's only a bit of the story, because I think also alongside that there are these things which have absolutely nothing to do with the specific place of the project, but they interject, or fragments of these interject our work and keep reappearing. So this is a kind of, I suppose, an alternative or parallel context that we work in, which are the things that fascinate us. And just by way of some very brief examples. So here in that house, that brick house, we were fascinated by the incredibly beautiful layered build-up of the roof of the shrine in Ise and how it expressed the different layers of the structure of the secondary structure, the thatch, obviously, and we tried to emulate that in our detail to express the layered nature of the build-up of the roof. I mean, obviously, that's Japan 1, Ireland 0. But likewise, when we were trying to wrestle with this flood-proofing detail in Marion Cricket Pavilion, where we had to drop in flood protection panels wherever there was a door, we were also thinking about these very beautiful windows in Kathmandu that we'd seen that where they extend the head and the sill of the window deep into the wall to kind of bind the wall together because they're very poor soil conditions and obviously are earthquake prone. Or just generally the windows of Louis Kahn. I showed here the Escherich house, but it's more specifically the way that Louis Kahn, I suppose, thought so radically about windows, breaking them into their constituent roles, where part of a window would be about getting light into a room, part of it would be about view, part of it would be about ventilation, and that's something we find incredibly powerful. And then finally, just the spatial experience of ROC's tea house near Porto, and just of being in a dim space, looking out at an illuminated landscape, which is kind of sucked into the space through horizontal proportion windows, and it's something we tried to emulate again in our cricket pavilion project. Obviously, again, CISA wins this hands down, so by comparison, we're not doing ourselves any justice here, but I'm going to hand quickly over to Alice, who's going to talk a little bit more in depth about a couple of projects. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I will sort of bet everybody's quite tired, so I will try and go through this as quickly as possible, then everyone can go and have their well-deserved cocktails. Cian has talked about how our projects are this combination of being very influenced by their place, but also that's combined with this idea of these kind of exotic fascinations or non-local fascinations we have. And that generally can result in buildings which have quite unique characters and which look and feel quite different from each other. However, our approach to each project is largely the same. Sorry, this has gone on to a timer for some reason. Okay. So our approach to each project is largely the same, and I'm going to show 3 projects today for 3 very different kind of clients and briefs in 3 very different locations. And I'm going to show how our approach is common to each of these. This is Marion Cricket Club. It's a sports pavilion for playing cricket in the inner suburbs of Dublin. It's a greenfield site kind of tucked behind some Edwardian housing. So for this project, we thought it was important to work within the existing typology. There was a strong typology there, the historic cricket pavilion, which is something like this. So and we took the elements of that archetypal cricket pavilion to be the fact that it was single story, it had a large roof and a colonnade facing the pitch. And this is our interpretation of that. And from this side, the building, pretty much conforms with that typology. But towards the rear, that form starts to break down and it starts to react to the place in which it's built. And at first glance, and certainly for us when we first looked at the site, it looked like it was a fairly unrestricted greenfield site. But actually there were lots of invisible restrictions that we discovered. And that ended up leaving sort of one place that the pavilion could be within the pitch and gave a maximum buildable footprint, which resulted in this kind of irregularly shaped plan. On the left hand, sorry, one last thing to say on that. Probably the most influential restriction on this site was that blue shading. The pavilion is in the floodplain of the River Dodder. So we had to deal with that in our building and make sure that we flood protected the interior spaces. The flood level was 1.7 meters, so nearly above my head height. So on the left-hand side of the plan, in the internal spaces, the bar and social spaces. On the right-hand side is the changing rooms. And they're all orthogonally or regularly shaped rooms. And then the kind of space between those regularly shaped rooms and the irregularly shaped form is this external viewing terrace and entrance portico. Sorry, and just coming back to that, how we flood-proof this building to, because 1.7 meters is above your eye height, so, you have to have solid construction for flood-proofing, so nobody would be able to see out of the pavilion to look at the cricket. So what we did was we raised the pavilion and the external spaces up by 600 millimeters, which is as high as you can raise something up externally without putting a balustrade or a guarding around it. And then so then that left us with 1.1 meters at the windowsills, which you can see on the left-hand side, which is the perfect place to kind of rest your arm against, to have a beer and look out. And then that made this kind of informal seating where you could see past over each other's heads. And the material character of the pavilion tells a couple of different stories. You have the concrete waterproof datum at the base, then the kind of contextual brickwork. The buildings behind were in this yellow brick, so we used quite a cheap yellow brick because this was a very low-cost building. And then you have the concrete ring beam, which is holding together this kind of faceted and asymmetric zinc-covered roof above. And this is that form breaking down towards the back, and you get these kind of very solid facades. But they then meet that portico language, colonnade language at this entrance portico. And it frames a view of the pitch from the entrance into the grounds. But wherever we obviously had to make doors and windows into the internal spaces. So wherever we had to break the flood-proof datum, we had to install drop-in flood barriers. And there was a guide rail that had to go for those that had to be above the level of the concrete. So we could have easily hidden that, but we decided to express it. Again, thinking about these windows and this idea that expression is an almost kind of subconscious or quiet expression of the invisible forces on the site. And this happened at all the different windows. And we had, if you have a look, you can see the perforated brickwork at the top. And that was really about expressing the difficulty of building a bar in a quiet residential neighborhood. So these sort of baffle the sound. And when ventilation panels are open or extract fans are on, and they probably come from us looking at these jolly screens in India. So those are those ventilation panels from behind. The material language of the interior is another reinterpretation of the traditional cricket pavilion, which always tends to be timber-lined. But so it's at once familiar but also strange. This is the interior of the bar. The windows all slide back, so the room opens to the covered terrace outside. They also, it stops cricket balls hitting the glass as well. They spent a lot every year replacing glazing in the previous clubhouse. And this is that view out, again, the one which probably doesn't compare too favorably with Caesar, but it was definitely something we were looking at. And then coming out to this viewing terrace. So the edges were modeled to make this kind of informal place to sit, that you could kind of do what you liked out here. And then you had the colonnade framing the view of the pitch. It gave this almost kind of cinematic, dramatic view of the action. And then because it faces west and cricket games are very, very long, it becomes this really lovely place to sit out in the setting sun. But I think it's interesting to note that the clients didn't ask for this viewing space. The original brief, like many briefs, only listed internal rooms and functions for the pavilion. But we think the building should be generous to their surroundings, that a building should be a good citizen and give back to the place it occupies. As architects, we added the viewing terrace as a form of free space, to use Shelley and Yvonne's term. And this was a space that wasn't strictly required, but we thought would add a sense of generosity, allowing people to occupy the space between inside and outside. And in 2015, we collaborated with 2 other practices to explore this idea of generosity in civic life. I might go through this. How am I doing on time? I'm okay. The project was a pavilion for the London Festival of Architecture. I maybe won't go through it too much, But it was in London, in Cubitt Square and King's Cross, and it was 2 temporary pavilions that formed facades. Our pavilion was the red one, and it was kind of a reassembly of, we were thinking of Haydock's Masks, and we were, of course, thinking of Parc de Villette by Schumi. And the pavilion itself was a reassembly of generous civic elements, like colonnades, arcades, market halls, terraces, things like that. And it was a commentary on the privatization of public space, but I won't go into that too much. It was basically a big facade with overlapping colonnades that made this open market hall below, with a viewing space above, a place to see and be seen, with these park benches, and you could look down over the square, and then these kind of funky or characterful staircases at either end to get up into that viewing gallery. And it was made out of very rudimentary materials. So it was plywood, steel, timber, and then, of course, these sand-filled concrete drainage pipes, which were sort of above-ground foundations. They stopped the big roof from blowing away in this very windy square. And at the back was this large corrugated fibre cement roof where there was these existing ponds, and the pavilion sort of stuck a few feet in the ponds, and the water came in under the overhang, and we liked that kind of tension. But then also the water fell off the roof and fed the ponds. And we think cities, by their nature, are collaborative. To be successful, shared values are transmitted, and each part must be generous and aim to work together. And although this pavilion only had a short life, it only lasted 3 weeks, which feels like a bit of a crime given how much work was in it. It had some direct influences on our own work. This is a house, a very small project, on and this is the final project that I'm going to show, a house on a country estate built by the aristocracy in the 1850s. But over time, that large domain was broken up and pieces of land were sold off, and our client bought this little patch of land highlighted in pink on the right-hand side there. So our project deals with 2 small historic buildings on the edge of the estate. At the top of the plan is a gate lodge, and at the bottom of the plan is a small derelict kennels building for the hunting dogs of the estate. This is the gate lodge, teeny tiny, just had 2 small rooms at the front and then 2 small rooms at the back. It was surrounded by concrete and gravel, and it had really small windows. And it was obviously, these buildings are built at a time where protection from the elements rather than enjoyment of the landscape was kind of the primary importance. This is the kennels, if you can believe it. It's underneath that big bush in the middle. And this is it. Again, this was a tiny building with 2 rooms, externally accessed through these caged areas. These are protected structures, so we had to keep a lot of historic fabric. So the challenge for us was how to add a significant amount of floor space to these small but complete structures. And how do we change their almost defensive relationship with their rural setting? We made 3 additions, 2 extensions to existing buildings and an outbuilding. We used the existing topography to embed the new structures and to make new groupings. I'm not going to go into this too much, but our design approach became about embedding the new additions into the landscape. On the left is the extension to the lodge, and on the right is the extension to the kennels. And they were embedded at different heights within the landscape. And then the roofs all there's no gutters in this project, so the water falls off the roofs, and waters a wildflower meadow on the left and a pond in the kennels. So this is the gate lodge after refurbishment, with the new extension is in the center, just peeking around the side. The volume of the original house is still clear and intact. But the extension becomes much more visible to the side, and I think you can start to see the connection to the red pavilion now. It's a long, low roof embedded in a wildflower meadow. The simple, almost abstract form of the extension combines with the corrugated roof cladding to echo the kind of language of typical farmyard buildings in the local area. And this is it, looking at the gate lodge from the existing wildflower meadow with the new stables, the new build stables in the right-hand side. And the material approach of all the additions carries through and is pretty ordinary materials, and they kind of serve like a muted backdrop to the new and existing wildflower planting. But the internal floor level of the lodge, combined with the deep overhang, creates a very particular relationship between inside and outside. The internal spaces feel embedded in the external landscape. You can reach out and touch nature. The overhang is practical. It allows you to open up the 8-metre-long window, even on rainy days. There are no gutters, as I said before. The roof waters the wildflowers. But it also creates a deep shadow immediately in front of the window. The landscape appears illuminated by the contrast, and this is obviously another view influenced by Caesar's tea house. In the living room, a long roof light connects you to the changeable sky. You become aware of the passing of time through the changing of the weather and the seasons. And coming down through the site, this is that new build stables looking back towards the extension to the gate lodge. This is the kennels. It was a tiny building that we managed to just fit one small bedroom and a very small ensuite, but we almost doubled its size by adding a small living kitchen area. This is how it is now. The new addition is on the left-hand side, and it echoes the form of the existing building on the right-hand side. And we've got, both of the forms are connected by the addition of a front porch, the languages of which sort of feels ad hoc, again, like these kind of farmyard structures or their farmyard tradition. It was grouped with the stables around these trees, and they kind of had this sort of conversation across time. And this is the interior, occupied by an elderly relative who has really sort of displayed all her stuff in a really beautiful manner, and we love this image. The pond is on the right-hand side, the existing structure on the left. So, to finish up, everybody will be glad we're coming to an end. To finish up where we started, we think it's important to ensure we give delight and enjoyment to the people who experience our buildings. Sorry, did it change? We do this through trying to recreate the enjoyment that we have felt in other buildings. For us, transmission happens in two ways, through expression and through generosity. By being expressive, like the Blacam and Mar were in Fairhouse Church, we allow others to understand what we were trying to say. And by being generous, we allow a conversation which can transcend time and place. Merci. Thank you. Was I really long?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Shane. Thank you, Shelley, Alice, and Kian for showing those beautiful projects. It has been very frustrating to see so little of such amazing project, really, but we have not so much time. So there's a little time left for debate and questions. So please, Shane and Shelley, come here for debate. I don't know if we have chairs or not. What time is left? Quel temps il nous reste? Il nous reste un quart d'heure au lieu d'une heure. Peut-être asseyez-vous, vous, voilà. Et les plus jeunes restent assis. Okay, we had many questions, but it will be difficult to ask many questions. I wanted to ask first a question to all of you. It's a sentence I've heard from you on, I don't remember which video, and you said something like, we must be economical with resources, but with a little bit more. we have to make something beautiful. So everybody knows nowadays that time is coming to use less and less resources, and even if the past 20 years we have seen such beautiful building, and maybe today, I don't know if you would build them the same way, because we have so much resources. So it's a very simple and very complicated question, but how to make beautiful with so few? Comment faire aussi peu? Alors, pendant que while you try to think, I just translate. C'est traduit peut-être ou pas? Oui, c'est traduit. Okay, pardon. Okay. So maybe the youngest architects, they have already answers by the project you have seen, and you haven't shown the beautiful work about the Belvedere College,
yes.
where you small intervention with very small things. Maybe you can try to begin to answer, even if it's very difficult.
Well, I mean, I think we see this a lot through teaching at the moment. The students that we teach, they understand way more than us, and they're much more developed than us in an attitude about carefulness and moderation and not doing things. And we also all have these debates about kind of what used to be kind of historic value. There's historic value in fabric, which there still remains, but now there's also this thing about carbon value in things which may not have historic value, or so there's this kind of emerging value system which is a shift from what we've conventionally known.
It's a shift away from valuing beautiful historic fabric and just valuing fabric for the sake of itself.
But there is other fabric, and it has another value which isn't about its greatness from an architectural perspective or its historic or how old it is. It has value. And I'm kind of really interested in where that might take us or shift us towards, so that there might be a language there is a language in that, and we see it kind of just starting to emerge, that there's a language in this which would speak of our time, in the way that modernism spoke of its time or the Gothic spoke of its time, that there is a language that is within these things which are, yes, we have to do because it's so critical, we have to deal with this issue, but that can reflect back to us the world, so I think there's positivity or potential in it.
And the language is through adaptive reuse, we will constantly have to be working in relation to something that exists, rather than, much more than we were before, rather than creating something out of nothing.
Thank you.
There were two people who were not architects who spoke recently to architects. One was an immunologist, and we asked him to speak to our office during COVID. And we were all working at home, and it was not a nice time. And we were asking about ventilation and what should architects do and how should they think about buildings, and how could we deal with this issue of virus and COVID and all this kind of thing. So there was a long discussion about that. And in the end, he said, don't forget beauty. He said, beauty is good for well-being. Beauty is important. And that was his parting message. And the other was, I was at a conference in Copenhagen, and a geologist came and he put a huge rock on the table, and it was fantastic, and it was millions of years old, and he spoke about this rock. And he was talking about resources, and that yes, we have to not use resources in a way that's not worth it and that is irresponsible. But then he said, but just a little bit more sometimes makes something beautiful. And he said, as architects, that our job was to deal with the crisis, but also to remember beauty. And I think the wish to make beauty is a state of mind. It's not always to do with, you can see the agenda of an architect in a building, a project, no matter how big or small or cheap, you can feel the agenda of an architect. So if somebody wants to make something carefully and with love, it will be beautiful. So.
Thank you. Shane, you want to say something, or?
Can I pass on this?
Yeah.
That's not fair.
Come on.
No, it's a very difficult question.
No,
maybe
it's not.
I will.
He has a good
Another
answer.
question. Of course, in the 70s, the 80s, but does it happen now when you see the beautiful buildings you have done that you say maybe we couldn't do that today because of the problem of the resources? You can pass on this too.
I mean, something that I have often said before, I mean, the thing that hurts most as being in an architect is when if it doesn't work, and if somebody is fighting with it, if it doesn't meet the, I mean, and that's happened, you know, that can happen, and that's what hurts most. I mean, which sort of says that it can happen different ways. I mean, it can happen that the brief was not well understood, and that maybe the rooms didn't work as they were supposed to work, and they're not good enough because how people use the building is really the most important thing, and I really feel that deeply. That what hurts most, I mean, apart from buildings that leak and sort of things, failures, building failures and so on like that, or bad weathering and stuff like that. But I think fundamentally that it comes down that, and I think not working means actually also spiritually that it doesn't meet, that it's not easy. I mean, and people know unconsciously what is successful. Mm.
It's good that you didn't pass on that question. Peut-être des questions dans la salle, peut-être on n'aura pas le droit à beaucoup, mais est-ce qu'il y a des questions? Est-ce que quelqu'un veut commencer? Là, je vois des doigts qui indiquent d'autres personnes, mais je ne vois pas le doigt qui se lève. Si. Là, oui, voilà. Faut lever bien le doigt, sinon on ne vous voit pas.
Did you have the time to capture what the city of Metz feels like? And if so, what do you think about the architecture of the city?
Could you repeat that, the first bit?
No problem. Did you have the time to capture what the city of Metz, the city where we are right now, feels like? And if so, what do you think about the architecture of this city?
Well,
we arrived.
Literally arrived in a taxi and ran straight here. But from what we saw,
I had nicer clothes to wear than this.
What do we think about Metz? We haven't seen it.
From the 5-minute walk, it's incredibly beautiful. Very beautiful.
I think just change that time to see the city, I think.
No, I mean, I suppose it's obvious, but I mean, there are two things. I mean, one is the landscape and the river and the topography of the ground and the planting, and the other is the cathedral. I mean, it is a complete, I mean, I had seen some of the cathedrals, but I have never seen anything so beautiful as the cathedral in Metz. I mean, the stained glass is unparalleled. The light and the way it is presented, the simplicity of the presentation, you have to see it. I mean, and it can be, it was late last night, I went over there to see the town hall and to see the, but the cathedral is just, it's the simplicity of the presentation also, just the chairs and the lights. I mean, the electric light, lighting the floor. The floor is what they light, not the windows. And the daylight, in the evening light, the light is coming through the, I mean, it is just extraordinary. I mean, but also this, the landscape around here and how they make bridges. You know, the bridges are made not with structure, but like with, I mean, with the landscape. The landscape is over the bridge and is easily running with a flat road through the, and the the landscape is planted back over the arch, generally often the arches, not sort of structures that are independent, you know, but just it's part of the landscape. So those two things, I mean, are profound impact.
Thank you. D'autres questions? Alors, oui, là-bas, timidement. Il ne faut pas être timide quand on lève la main.
Hi, good evening. What would you say is the most valuable thing you have learned during your careers?
Wow.
What's the most valuable thing you've learned in your career? What's the most valuable thing? It's a big question. For me, anyway, I think that one's easy. I think that you've got to be very comfortable with making lots of mistakes. That making mistakes is what we do all day, every day, and you learn from them and you embrace them and you move on and you do it better next time.
I would say just briefly, I think there's absolutely no substitute for travel, seeing buildings in the flesh. It sounds very simple, but it's been really, really profound. And I think if you have the ability and I think just travel, see the world, drink it in. That's what I would say. There's no other education like it.
I tried to say it in my introduction when I was talking about I felt that in relation to what happened in Dublin 30, 40 years ago when people looked over the fence and they extended their horizon beyond their immediate surroundings and made contacts throughout Europe and as a student and travel. And there is I think it's the most important thing is to learn from seeing other things and engaging with other countries and other cultures. There's no doubt about that. And I mean, we had a conversation before, you know, about what has happened in European politics in the last few years, and the British pulling out of the European Union is a hugely difficult thing for Europe, you know, and I mean the isolation of Britain now is, and the extension of what has happened to Ireland. I mean that they've extended their horizons politically and in their departments of foreign affairs, their engagement throughout the world, and especially in Europe.
D'autres questions? Je sais pas, il nous reste un tout petit. Non, il ne nous reste pas beaucoup de temps. Oh, une dernière toute petite question. Allez, une toute dernière toute petite.
Hello. First of all, thank you for the nice presentation. I'm an architect student from Strasbourg. So it's about a young architect, the attitude about, you know, today there's a lot of questions about the development of technology and AI and everything. So there are some people who's saying that, like in the future, there will be like less, how do we say, the architect, the job like of the architect will be pretty different than today. So I'm wondering like how it will be the attitude that we have to have as a senior architect, that how do you see like the role of the young architect today, like how we have to be prepared, or the attitude or vision or perspective or something like that?
How to be prepared? Yeah, I think...
With the new situation.
I mean, there's one good thing that the older you get as an architect, the younger you get, I believe. But the other thing is that the power of imagination. I mean, we find we're all teachers, and what's fantastic is that sometimes you find a very young student in the first year does something better than you could ever do. So to believe in yourselves and your own imagination. And I suppose the thing that I've learned about architecture over the years is that the incredible richness and potential of architecture to embrace all let's say, challenges at all scales, and that it's more and more engrossing and engaging as you get older. But the practicalities are immense. Like they're the responsibilities, but maybe it's just not to be fearful. I find a lot of young people are fearful of the future, whereas if you just maybe forget about fear and deal with the challenges, but also to believe in yourselves as a force. I mean, you have fantastic opportunities, even though there are all these crises and challenges at the moment. I also believe that it makes more space for architecture, because the commercial world is challenged. They don't know what to do a lot of the time. And where there's confusion and challenge, there's space for architecture. I really think that's true.
Thank you. Je crois que c'est terminé. On n'a plus le temps. Thank you very much for the time you spend.
That was a good.
We have to give back.